And we are back with Boyd Matheson. Okay, Boyd, Congressman Ron Paul. Let's take a look at what he has done right and what he has done wrong.
All right. I think Congressman Paul is a master at getting the passionate message across to his constituents and to those who believe in his cause. He tells that story well. He is a serious, thoughtful person in terms of his approach to things, which I think comes across often in a little bit humorous way on some of the national debates. But again, it comes across as credible in terms of someone who's really thinking things through and is trying to really get down to some of the harder issues. So he plays to his base incredibly well. They're fiercely loyal. They're on the bandwagon. They're focused and in, and so that's probably his greatest strength is playing to his base. He knows how to get them excited. He knows how to deliver the message in a way that makes sense to them, and at the same time, that's also his biggest weakness. He has not been able to create any stretch in his brand. In other words, he hasn't been able to stretch it across any national forums. He hasn't been able to even stretch it across the conservative movement in terms of being able to play to a larger audience. And so if you look at many of his events, they're really preaching to the choir kind of events. And while those are fun, they're exciting, they're energetic, they often don't translate into moving the needle in terms of a path to the presidency. And he's actually been pretty consistent over the last few elections in terms of what his base is and where he will end up at the end of the day. And unfortunately, he doesn't seem interested enough in expanding his message or framing his message. It's not that he has to soften his message. It's not that he needs to water down his message. He simply has to be in places where he can expand people's ability to hear it and to either accept it or reject it. And so I think the campaign's biggest challenge is going beyond. There's almost a false sense of confidence that happens in campaigns when you continue to deliver the same message to the same people, but you still get a great response. Because you think you're winning, you think you're building momentum, but you're talking to the same people over and over and over again, and you can't govern that way. You can't win an election that way because you've got to get to people who aren't fully on board with you. You have to get those that are slightly more moderate or have a slightly different view on taxes or immigration or whatever it may be. And again, it doesn't mean in any way, shape, or form that you have to change your message or not be true to who you are or what your principles are. You simply have to communicate in a way and in forums and in settings that are going to invite people to actually listen. And I think Congressman Paul's biggest challenge is he's not getting enough new people to listen. He just continues to hammer on the diehard supporters, and they're great, they're committed, they're on board, but they aren't sufficient to move the needle in this kind of an election cycle.
Well, and two things that I personally have seen with Congressman Paul. Number one, the pitch problem that you talked about with Hillary Clinton and Michelle Bachmann, Ron Paul also has it.
Definitely.
When he gets really passionate, his voice goes higher and higher and higher and whiny. So I find that a problem just because it's like fingernails on a chalkboard for me, regardless of what sex you are.
Yes, absolutely. Great example. Great example.
Yeah, and substantially, going to a substantial issue, his foreign policy, I think, is going to keep a lot of people from jumping on board with him unless by some miracle he wins the nomination and it's him against Barack Obama. Then I will forget the pitch and I'll forget the foreign policy and I will fight for the man to win. But he's got some big issues that will, I believe, keep him from getting the support of others in the party because he is so rock hard, solid on his foreign policy, which I find dangerous. and where he stands on drugs, which I also find dangerous. And so he's got two major issues that are substantial, that are his big problem, let alone his pitch issues.
Yeah, and I think it's always interesting that the policy issues are significant, and I think each of the candidates, because there are no perfect candidates,
That's right.
are going to deal with policy issues. I think where the differentiation is made is those who are able to say, yeah, we're not going to agree on everything, but continue to have a bold, positive message that, again, can invite people in, help them feel like they're part of the story. And, yes, I'm not going to agree with any politician. I don't know if there's a human that you can agree with on every single thing, and that's okay. I mean, we're a diverse nation, and we're never going to agree on everything, and that's okay. But how you frame it, and then how you are able to communicate, and as you said, the tone is so significant, because if it's whiny, if it's pitchy, if it comes across as not being professional or presidential,
or under control.
Yes, exactly. That can really undermine people's confidence in your other policies, and often that's the bigger deal. In other words, if I sound really whiny and stressed and frustrated about foreign policy, people are probably not going to think I'm very credible on domestic policy or some of the social issues, and so on. And so it doesn't just it transcends the policies you disagree with, and it starts to undermine any confidence you might have on the areas you do agree with. And that's a big challenge for Congressman Paul.
I'm afraid that is absolutely true, Boyd. He's got some big obstacles to overcome, bigger than I think the rest of the candidates in those very things. Now, last but not least, Ambassador John Huntsman, who I like to call the Ken of the election, as in Barbie and Ken.
That's good. And are you saving Newt Gingrich for very last for a reason?
Yes,
okay.
I am.
So let's get Governor Huntsman
out of the way.
Yes, let's get him out of the way. A very interesting and very hard to understand strategy from the former governor and ambassador to China. I think what they were trying to do is create this cool, hip, as you said, Ken doll kind of excitement coming in that he was different and unique, and he's a motorcycle rider and all of those things. I think they were looking at the Obama playbook in terms of how he kind of stormed onto the scene. But the way they delivered that was absolutely flat and ineffective. People in Iowa, South Carolina, New Hampshire really don't care if you're riding a mountain bike in southern Utah. It doesn't matter. They want to know what are your principles and how are you going to govern. And I think the greatest weakness of the Huntsman campaign is they still don't know who they are. And it also shows you that, again, money can be a great deterrent to a successful campaign. Because they had money, because he could self-fund, they didn't need a whole lot of people early on. And, they stayed at nice hotels, and they kind of did things upscale and did all of those kinds of things, which, again, to voters in those early primary states, they really don't care. They want you to come in and be real. They want you to lay down some principles. They want you to talk about issues. And to be honest, I don't think anyone still knows who he is as a candidate. Now, I will give them credit for one thing. They were able to stir the national media for a season in a pretty remarkable way. When you think about it, here was a candidate who was polling at 1%. At 1%, which means if you take in the margin of error of 4%, Governor Huntsman could have been -3
yes.
on the scale. And yet he garnered national media attention for several weeks on nothing, on really nothing at all, other than he was getting in the race. He had a lot of money. He'd been ambassador to China. And so they did that part really well. I'm not sure why it worked or how it worked from a strategy standpoint, but obviously it was not sustainable. He's very vanilla. The only thing he's taken a stand on was not showing up in Nevada, which was was an interesting thing to stake your campaign on. That I'll prove myself to the New Hampshire voters by staying in New Hampshire while everyone else is on TV for a couple of hours. Probably most of the people in New Hampshire watching them in Nevada.
Yes, he doesn't seem to be a serious candidate. I mean, I know he is because he's throwing money into it, but I remember him as governor of Utah. I remember the things I didn't like about him as governor of Utah. And I'm watching him on the national stage lie in those debates, claiming things that he had nothing to do with. And I see him as having so many problems that he's not going to be able to overcome them.
Yeah, I think they're really on their last legs, mostly because they simply, they started with a Florida strategy a la Rudy Giuliani. That proved to not be working, so let's go to a smaller, less expensive place to buy media and to do events. Let's go to New Hampshire, also an area that's a little more independent in terms of their approach, and that's really what he staked his whole campaign on, which, again, with the one thing about New Hampshire voters is they do want you to stand for something, and I have not seen a coherent message or strategy, regardless, again, of the policies or the politics of it. They're not standing out. There's an interesting book called The Collapse of Distinction, and in the face of overwhelming similarities, different is usually perceived as better, and you see that in brands, you see that in commercial items. Trying to differentiate. And I can't think of anything that the Huntsman campaign has done other than, again, the early things of trying to get the younger voter and trying to be hip and cool and different. Even those things are kind of commodities in today's world anyway. Everything's about being more youthful. And it really didn't play.
Yeah, it really did. He's kind of the Barack Obama candidate without the money.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Obama got $1 billion, so
that's right. And even when he was governor of Utah, I really don't think that his writers and his strategic team have ever captured his real voice in terms of who he really is and what he's really passionate about. So he often comes across as very dispassionate, unmotivated, cerebral in a kind of weird way. There's lots of awkward moments in his approach, and whether that's because they're trying to over-message him or whether he has not really laid it out that, hey, gang, this is who I am, this is what I'm about, and this is what I'm going to talk about. I just can't figure out what they're doing in that space because they're not moving the message any way, shape, or form. And as a result, he's just vanilla. He's floundering at 1% and 2%, and I really have a hard time seeing a path for them to capture it.
Yeah, I think you're right. All right, last but not least, and I really did forget him. I forgot about him, the bulldog of the race,
yeah.
Newt Gingrich. I don't know why. I was going through the list, and I'm like, there are too many candidates. Dang it, who am I forgetting? And it was Newt Gingrich. They need to start whittling this down. I'm serious.
Yes. Yeah, we
Some
seriously
of them need to
say,
yeah, like Huntsman and Johnson, why don't they just say, okay, this is not in the cards for me right now. That'd be 2 more gone, and I could start to maybe remember them all. All right, Gingrich, who has more experience than all of them.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So I think the positive things about Newt Gingrich, he obviously comes across as very thoughtful. The one thing I love about Gingrich is that he is the best in the box, out of the box thinker, I think, in the country. In other words, he is creatively looking at out of the box ideas, but he always looks at them within the box of the Constitution. and historical settings. And so it's a very interesting combination. And obviously he is just fun to listen to because he's an idea guy. And that's an important thing. I think he comes across on the stage as someone who's incredibly thoughtful, incredibly creative, someone you would definitely want in your boardroom if you're trying to solve a problem. You want to get his input for sure, because he's going to look at it in a unique way, and he's going to add some real value to the dialogue and the conversation. And he loves dialogue. He loves that. I love the way that they have, and they've started to overdo it, which I think they have to be careful of, and that is that he has this unique ability to scold the moderator of that's a really stupid question, or things up, and we're trying to have a dialogue about the direction of our country. And so they have to play that in a balanced way so it doesn't come across whiny or vindictive, or it's just an agenda against the media or the moderator.
Well, he comes across as angry. I mean,
yes,
angry, and that's a problem. We need someone who is resolute, who has a clear vision, who understands what needs to be done in order to restore America. And we can't have it driven by anger. As angry as people feel at times, if it's driven by anger, which he appears to be, and I know he's not, but that's the way he talks.
Yes.
He's not going to be able to do anything. However, I do think he'd make a fabulous Secretary of State.
Yes. Like I said, he's a great idea guy. He has, for all his connections to Reagan and many of the things that happened, he is not the happy warrior. No. He is not coming across as the happy warrior. And I think probably his biggest challenges are in his discipline from a governing and from a structure standpoint. And I think part of that comes from, and it's a similar challenge to Sarah Palin, in that it's much easier to be the idea person, to get paid a lot of money to go in and sign books or give a speech, than it is to be a disciplined candidate who is running an organization. I mean, they really have to be the CEO of their campaign. And I just don't think he likes the details of it. He doesn't like the monotony of it. I think he gets a little tired of speaking at little small groups instead of big stadiums full of people and groups that are going to applaud and be nice, and so I think he struggles with that discipline component to it. And again, for a campaign, that's a vital element. You not only have to have a great message, you also have to have the ability to deliver it to small groups, to individuals, to help them feel like they're part of it. And again, he's done some great things with some of his different initiatives and some of his groups online. They have some great resources and obviously some great ways to look at doing things differently. But until they're able to frame that in the context of a campaign, they'll continue to be a force out there in terms of being a political action committee or being a foundation. They can do all of those things, but running a campaign is a very different animal. And it requires, as we talked about earlier, an element of discipline and structure that you just can't wing it. Now, I will say I do love the thought of Newt Gingrich and Barack Obama sitting down for a 3-hour debate with no moderator, simply a timekeeper. I would pay to watch that.
Both, and I really believe Barack Obama would walk out with his head under his arm.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh man, would that be worth the price of a ticket? I'll tell you what.
And really, I think that's something for those that are listening. I think that's something that the public needs to become aware of, because most of these debates are so tightly scripted. And to be honest, it doesn't matter if it's CNN or MSNBC or Fox News. The way these are getting framed is as a full contact sport, and while politics and presidential politics in particular is full contact, I think what the American people really want is a dialogue. They want to have a dialogue about issues. And just having questions framed in a gotcha kind of way, or a way to make sure that you take a cheap shot at your opponent, that is not the path to the presidency, nor is it a path for either party to be able to effectively govern and lead the people. this country is starving for dialogue. I think they're getting sick of the sound bites. They're getting sick of the talking heads. And the danger of that is that everybody just disengages. And we know where that leads, because then the decisions will be made by the aristocracy as opposed to the individuals out there doing the democracy thing. And that's a real danger zone to me, is that if all of these debates, whether it's on the Republican side or ultimately against President Obama, if all they are is just, cheap shot, gotcha, oh, you said this in 1967, how can you live with yourself, or why is that not congruent with who you are today, or you said, I love it when they put the quote up on the board and then say, do you agree or disagree? And of course, it's probably one of their own quotes or a quote from Abraham Lincoln or Ronald Reagan. And it's like, come on, let's have a dialogue about the issues and the principles. Everything else will take care of itself.
You know what? And I wish that we could do that. I remember in the last presidential campaign, one of the Fox News weekend anchors, and this really made me crazy, by the way, said that issues no longer mattered. It just merely mattered how you looked and if your smile was nice, and that was what would get you elected. And I'm like, yeah, that got us Barack Obama. Thanks,
yes.
bunches.
Yeah. Now, how's that working out for us?
Not great. All right. We are coming to the end of the interview, so we have got to do our matchups. Are you ready?
Okay, I think we're ready.
All right. Mitt Romney versus Barack Obama. Who wins?
I think at this point, again, one thing we have to remember is it's always a snapshot.
Yes.
We have to remember the previous campaign, and of course, on the Republican side, at this point, it was Rudy Giuliani and Fred Thompson as the dominant forces. I think McCain was a distant fourth and in complete disarray. You can also look at the first President Bush, and his approval ratings were over 80% at one point. No one on the Democratic side even wanted to run, which is what led to Bill Clinton. And then, of course, everything turned. And so there's a lot of change. But looking at it, if the economy continues as it is today, I really do believe it's Romney's to lose. I think he has the right pieces in place. I think he's gained the right experience as a candidate. I think he can appeal to the independents, which are ultimately going to tilt this election in the end. And I think he can frame just how over his head President Obama is, so I do think it's his to lose at this point. Okay.
Let's say Herman Cain versus Barack Obama.
That would be a fascinating matchup on
really
levels. I think part of that would depend on how and what Cain would do in terms of a running mate. Whether he would choose someone for political reasons or whether he would choose people for a governing reason. That actually sends a big message to the people. Obama clearly chose Vice President Biden for political reasons because of experience and foreign policy. It was a political move. A
bad one.
A bad one
at
the end.
Political move, yeah, because he's the gift that keeps on giving.
Yes, yeah. Indeed. A soundbite a day or more is what we get from him. But I think that would say a lot about Herman Cain in terms of where he goes. It was interesting listening to Karl Rove the other day. He was talking about how furious he was about President Bush choosing Dick Cheney as a running.
I thought was smart.
Yeah, and obviously that was not a political move. Getting the state of Wyoming was not a big political issue in that campaign. So he made a governing choice. That he thought that's who would, best serve him and give him advice and counsel and those kinds of things. So I think for Herman Cain against Barack Obama, I think the vice president choice will matter because of his inexperience in governing. I do think he could defeat Obama, but I think it would be a challenge because of the Obama billions. The $1 billion is going to be a big deal, and for an inexperienced candidate who will be playing significant catch-up, especially with where he is today. He doesn't have the structure. He doesn't have the fundraising in place to really be positioned well to take on a $1 billion machine that is very, very good at branding, messaging, and strategy.
Okay, so Mitt Romney's a big W for a win, and Herman Cain's a little W for a win or an L for a lose?
I think he could squeak it out.
Squeak it out, small W.
Small
Okay.
W.
Okay, how about Rick Perry?
I do not believe that Perry can win. I can't even put my finger on exactly what it is. There's something missing. There's something missing there. And while he has proven the ability to raise money and has some organization in place, I just think there is something lacking there. Again, remembering that most elections are not won on the strength, but lost or won on your opponent's weaknesses. I just think the Obama campaign would be too precise in their ability to dissect him, to unravel him, to expose his weaknesses, and he actually plays into Obama's greatest strength, which is blame Bush. And so they will do everything to make him out as another Texas governor who is just not going to be right for the country at this point in time.
I think I agree with you on that one. Rick Santorum versus Barack Obama.
Oh, again, that's a tough one. There's nothing I would rather see than see someone of principle just beat the snot out of someone who's not. I have a hard time seeing that one. It would be such a clash of styles. It would be substance versus style, which I would love to see somebody take that on. But again, based on where the Obama campaign is already, I think that, again, unless things really shifted, I think it would be a challenge for Santorum to be able to carry that across. Although, again, on substance, it's feasible. But again, the messaging, the strategy would be probably more significant to him than any other candidate.
Okay. So basically a loss because he hasn't proven his ability to change that.
That's right. That would be my biggest concern.
All right. Ron Paul.
I don't think Ron Paul can win because of his inability to stretch his base. Again, loyal following, it's a small following, and unless he can change the game in terms of his ability to stretch and expand his audience, he really just kind of gets lost in the shuffle.
Yeah, he really does. Okay, Gary Johnson. That's a loss.
That's a big L.
We don't even have to go into details on that one.
Just put a big L in that column.
Yeah. Okay, Michelle Bachmann.
I don't see a path to the presidency for Michelle Bachmann at this point. She's just too much of a one-note, one-liner, and ultimately in one-on-one debates, you can't sit across from the president and say we're going to make you a one-term president. It's not a winning message. And I think her team's in a little bit of disarray right now. Things could change, but she has to really develop the substance behind the one-liners, or that's all she'll ever become.
Well, I'm afraid that's true. All right, John Huntsman.
That's another big L.
Okay.
I just cannot see a path at this point where one, he could navigate the Republican nomination. He's not strong enough on any particular issue and is pretty vanilla on most of the others and is weak on others beyond that I can't see him navigating the Republican nomination. I do think, interestingly, that out of many of the candidates, he does have a better chance in a general election because of many of his centrist views. So in one aspect, he probably proves a better alternative to Obama in some ways, but I can't see a path to the nomination for him.
I can't either. Okay, Newt Gingrich versus Barack Obama. That'd be awesome.
It would be awesome. And like I said, I would pay to watch that one because it would just be so fun.
Yeah.
And I actually think, again, this is given if he can become the happy warrior, if he can prove the discipline to be the CEO of a campaign and not just farm it out, to his handlers. I actually think he could beat President Obama because he does have substance. He does have big ideas. He talks to the American people in a way that makes sense and rings true. And so I think he could actually defeat President Obama. I think he's got big challenges to secure the nomination on the Republican side, but were he to navigate that with the right strategy, with the right branding, if this became a real dialogue of ideas, he wins that battle.
Okay, so it looks to me like Mitt Romney emerges as the one who can, with the greatest amount of strength, defeat Barack Obama. Herman Cain, if he can overcome a couple of things, could defeat Barack Obama. The rest cannot. And Newt Gingrich, if he can become the happy warrior, can defeat Barack Obama. Did I get that right?
I think that's right. As of today.
As of this moment in time. Okay. Well, Boyd, thank you so much for joining me on Turning the Tide today. It was such a privilege to have you. I love discussing these kinds of things with you because you are so brilliant at drilling down to the exact issues that are the problem and how to correct them. Oh, hey, I forgot Barack Obama.
Now, you told me not to give him any advice, though, right?
That's right. You can just say what he's doing wrong.
I think the president's greatest challenge, obviously, is the economy and what hasn't worked. Because you can spin that till the cows come home, but if you're out of work and if your neighbor's out of work, that's a tough sell. And so, given the state of the economy, it's interesting that he is choosing to circumvent Congress now to try to get some things done and to show himself as, hey, I'm the populist. I'm the one who gets you, the people. His new thing this morning with the student loans and lowering those payments and no more than 10% of your earnings and all of those kinds of programs. He has proven that he is over his head in terms of really dealing with the problems and issues and even more importantly who he surrounds himself with in terms of getting to those solutions. He had to have Newt Gingrich come in just to shout ideas around. Which would, again, I'd pay to watch. It would be very fun. But as always, he is the master of the soundbite. He's another guy who can read the phone book and people would stand and cheer because he can deliver it in a masterful, charismatic way.
Barack Obama?
Yeah, he.
Oh no, I hate his inflection in his voice. I hate his intonation. And
you know the substance, Candace.
and he is not a master communicator because he can't communicate without the teleprompter. Therefore,
right.
He cannot be a master communicator. Period.
Well, he is good at controlling the message. Again, so if you go back, so if you look at a branding and a strategy and a communication standpoint, he does extremely well. He rarely gets himself in those off the cuff things. Even an appearance on Jay Leno was so incredibly scripted that he is never going to be out of his cool comfort zone. And so most of the time that does require a teleprompter. But he can deliver off of a teleprompter, and for the most part, people buy it. And he does have some natural charisma. And it's interesting, whether it's a Ronald Reagan or a Bill Clinton or a Barack Obama, there are a Herman Cain. There are people that have that natural charisma that, again, people often stop listening to the words and they're just caught up in the persona of what's in front of them. And in a visual world, in a soundbite world, you don't have to be very good for very long to control the message. And
you know what? I guess that I am just not a normal person.
You know the substance part too well that you're never going to get distracted by the style.
I'm afraid so, because of those four that you listed, only Ronald Reagan and Herman Cain can even keep my attention for longer than a couple of minutes. The other two, I have to refrain from throwing things at the television.
Yeah, and that's a substance issue. But again, if you look at it across personalities, charisma, style. I mean, to be honest, Bill Clinton stole a lot of things from Ronald Reagan in terms of style and presentation.
He did.
Because he could do it, and not everyone can pull that off. And so even though the politics are polar opposites, there are still things that play and things that work from a communication and branding standpoint. And again, I think that will be the greatest challenge to Republicans and conservatives, is that, it goes back to the quote we talked about at the beginning from Arch Madsen, that we're waging this war with very powerful communication weapons. And both sides get access to the weapons, and it's how they are engaged that matter. And President Obama has a machine that is great at branding and is great at controlling the message. And until the conservatives can prove that they can make it not just popular, but meaningful and truly connect with people in a way that makes sense, that isn't just something that they're going to kind of cram through, or something that's coming out of some think tank or some political consultant, I think it is time for the conservative movement to get very real, to get very honest, to get very positive in the principles that made this country great, and not just from a platitude standpoint. That's not going to cut it. It's going to be about substance and getting people to listen long enough that it can actually ring true. And to me, that's the whole key to defeating President Obama is, can you cut your way through the sound bites and the professionally produced commercials and ads and internet clips? Can you create a message that the American people can hear, that is positive, that is grounded in who we are as a nation? That is the only way we turn the tide, as you like to say, Candace. And to me, that is what it's about. And it's a slow turn. It's a slow turn, but it's one that happens when people engage. I think the most important thing in this campaign is for people to engage their neighbors in dialogue, not in what they see with talking heads and people shouting over each other on primetime TV, but in having meaningful dialogue with your neighbors and with your friends across the country. We live in an age where you can do that. You can have a nice dialogue with someone in New Jersey or North Texas or San Jose, and those are the weapons. Those are the weapons we have to use in the most important debate in the history of our nation, because it's about tilting the direction that we go. Do we continue to be an extraordinary country that believes it has a divine destiny, in a country and a citizenry that matter, that make a difference, that care about each other, that help people become self-reliant and make a difference? Or are we going to go the way of Europe and a nanny state and things where we become more and more dependent on a government that can't afford itself now and will ultimately implode? But it's dialogue. It's dialogue, 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 and that's not about professionally produced ads or sound bites on a news program. And so it really does come down to we the people deciding what we believe, what principles matter most, and what politicians can tell that story, deliver that message, and create the energy and engagement of the citizens so that they realize that they are part of this freedom agenda. They're a part of this great country we call America, and that everyone has to stand up and make a difference and be heard and be accountable and stand for what they believe in and the future that we have as an extraordinary nation.
Wow, Boyd, I could not say it any better. That is precisely what we need to do. Thank you so much for joining me on Turning the Tide today. It has been such a privilege chatting with you and going over all the candidates and their strengths. And we're going to get this out there all across the board. They need to listen to you. There's just no question. So thank you. Boyd Matheson of Trillium Strategies has been visiting with me on Turning the Tide today. And Boyd, you have a wonderful day.
Thanks again, Candace. Look forward to being back with you again soon.
Oh, absolutely.
All the best.
You too. Bye-bye.